Hello and welcome to our Embed, Deploy, Relax, Introducing InterBase XE Database webinar. My name is Al Manarino and I'm one of the Embarcadero sales consultants in the Americas. Also joining me on this webinar is Mr. Stephen Ball, Embarcadero sales consultant from EMEA. In this webinar, we will learn what's new in InterBase XE security, scalability, and performance, how ISVs, independent software vendors, and customers use InterBase when designing, implementing, and optimizing their applications, how to utilize cloud services with InterBase, how to take advantage of the tight InterBase integration with RAD Studio XE2 and FireMonkey when creating multi-platform applications. We will see rapid application development of multi-tier InterBase database applications using DataSnap. And lastly, we'll discuss the ease of migration from previous InterBase versions to XE. For the agenda, we'll quickly overview how ISVs and customers use InterBase. And you may be surprised to know InterBase is already part of your everyday life, even if you don't know it. We'll cover the InterBase XE enhancements in the areas of security, scalability, performance, and ease of development. And in the ease of development area, I'll turn the presentation over to Stephen to show us how quickly you can get InterBase installed and running. And then next, we'll discuss the steps to migration from older InterBase versions to the current XE. And then, just in case you have not seen the Embarcadero database tools for InterBase, I'll quickly show you the 3 Embarcadero database tools that support InterBase. And lastly, we'll show you the new RAD Studio XE2 with InterBase XE and some of the new types of applications you can create for cross-platform support using the new FireMonkey application framework, and we'll leave time at the end for any questions. So who uses InterBase? Well, I'm pleased to say InterBase is already part of your life, whether you know it or not. In almost every shopping mall, you can find InterBase. InterBase is utilized by Mrs. Fields Cookies, Cold Stone, Wetzler's Pretzels, Great Clips, and many more as their point-of-sale systems. When you visited your doctor, InterBase was there. In the ultrasound equipment, when you had an eye exam, the systems that manage your care have InterBase embedded in them. InterBase is also part of your safety. InterBase is in the 911 emergency call systems and helps the police prepare and submit incident reports. InterBase is even there when you need to relax and unwind. It makes sure that your hotel is able to manage your spa appointment for your weekend getaway and assists in the management of your golf tournament. InterBase as an embedded solution. Solutions using InterBase databases can be smaller than a credit card, and some are accessed in ways like never before. We can talk to computers, write on them, and communicate with them physically. This means that a whole range of IT solutions that were never possible before can be delivered in a wide range of new form factors. And one thing that many of these new form factors have in common is size. And size gives InterBase XE one advantage many of our competitors can't match. InterBase XE is one of the smallest footprint, full-featured database management systems available on the market today. It was designed when system real estate was a premium, and our business partners value that. InterBase XE installs in less than 40 megabytes and runs in as little as 2 megabytes of RAM. So for ISVs and OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, delivering device-based solutions, that means more manageable hardware costs and more room for product functionality. Competitors' products can require 10 to 20 times the amount of space. So to compete in the embedded market, our competitors offer ISVs and OEMs stripped down, less functional versions of their products. With InterBase, ISVs can take full advantage of all of the features of InterBase without having to sacrifice space or drive up manufacturing costs. So InterBase is perfect for ISVs who build applications for sale to consumers or industry verticals, OEMs who manufacture equipment requiring an onboard embedded database, and value-added resellers, VARs, who build applications for the small and medium enterprise. InterBase for single user and workgroup applications. The changes in devices and form factors are also affecting the types of solutions that can be delivered to the Global 1000 head of the database market that is dominated by other databases. InterBase XE is a great solution for single user and workgroup applications. Many of these are processes that IT shops could not afford to deliver automated solutions for before some of these devices were available or before devices were more affordable. The cost of delivering a solution simply outweighed the benefit either because the necessary hardware was too expensive, the cost to develop the software was prohibitive, or the training needed by the personnel involved would be excessive. So take, for example, visitor logs. So this is a pure, simple database application that is still done with pen and paper. The reason is simple. Many people who visit offices would be intimidated by having to sign in using a computer keyboard and monitor. This would add cost for reception personnel to help and IT costs if problems arose with the system. But with a tablet PC at less than $400, a laser pen, a Delphi and InterBase application, a very effective, user-friendly, and planet-friendly solution can quickly return on the investment with reduced paper costs, storage costs, and the personal cost of managing and storing the physical logs. But you might be thinking, I can also do this with another database like Oracle. Yes, but not at the same price point. And these devices, let's say, have 1 gigabyte of RAM only. So these competitor databases, at a minimum, they require the 1 gigabyte of RAM. So you could either run the competitor's database or the app, but not together. You might also be thinking you could do this type of application with MySQL database, but you really can't because MySQL even requires 2 gigabytes of RAM to run. So InterBase XE is definitely the right choice for these applications. So with InterBase XE, you embed the database, deploy the application, and relax. So InterBase is really the ideal solution for current Delphi, C++ Builder, and RAD Studio customers due to tight integration with InterBase, corporate development groups working on applications that will be deployed to many locations within the enterprise, developers in a corporate development group or at an ISV, OEM, or VAR who uses our development tools, developers building applications for use in situations where there is no DBA or IT support, and for the developer's manager who's under constant pressure to keep development, deployment, and especially ongoing support costs down. So what's new in InterBase XE? Well, first, InterBase XE Update 3 was released back on September 2011, building on the value that InterBase has already provided our customers for many years. So please assure you download the latest Update 3 if you have not done so already, so you can benefit from all the latest enhancements we are going to show you in this presentation. So these are the 4 specific InterBase XE areas we will overview in the time we have for this webinar: security, scalability, performance, and ease of development. InterBase security. So InterBase XE builds on the security features we introduced in InterBase 2009. It provides both database and column level encryption that are now required by many industries today. Primarily telecommunications, finance, and the credit card industry are all areas where data encryption is very important. So InterBase provides AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, and DES, strength out of the box. AES is available in multiple bit strengths, as we see here, 128, 192, and 256 bit strength. This enables you to put any amount of sensitive information into an InterBase database and deploy it with proper encryption, so you can rest assured that if the data falls into the wrong hands, it will not be visible for any abuse. InterBase also provides encrypted communication capability between the database application and the database server. So while the data is in transit, it is not open for any snooping. So InterBase uses the very popular and industry standard OpenSSL implementation for providing encryption over the wire. In InterBase XE, we enhanced the user authentication support for stronger passwords. And this was required by customers needing to adhere to one of the payment card industry, PCI, desktop security, DSS requirements. And InterBase XE also improves additional authentication to verify authenticated users to be able to restore database backups. InterBase and scalability. One of the main focus for InterBase XE also was to address the increasing needs for customers to access larger memory. InterBase XE has a 64-bit edition for your Windows deployments where you have very large databases that could benefit from higher memory capacity on the system. Internally at Embarcadero, we have many InterBase databases in multiple gigabyte sizes that have benefited from the 64-bit implementation, and we see many of our customers also choosing to deploy with 64-bit InterBase editions on Windows. So we support Windows 2008 Release 2 and Windows 7 64-bit with InterBase XE. You can also choose to have a lot of your data in the InterBase database cache. So many customers have databases in the hundreds of gigabytes range, and provided the system has the memory resources, you can accommodate a lot of your data in memory. InterBase allows you to make the necessary modifications at your production site to increase or decrease the amount of database cache that is defined for your database file. The 64-bit edition allows you to have up to 75 million database pages in cache. So that's an implemented limit, but the system resources in terms of RAM are often less than this upper limit. So you might choose to say use 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of memory for your InterBase database cache as you have resources available. InterBase XE also enabled the database to pack in more data per page. So we introduced table-specific blocking factors, which dynamically pack different sets of records based on the record size and as the data grows over time. When you back up and restore your database, InterBase automatically adjusts the number of records that can be stored in a table based on existing data. So this is very different from previous releases of InterBase, where there was only a single blocking factor for the whole database. In XE, each table can have its own blocking factor, which defines how many records can be stored per page. For the next item, larger index key segment size. This has been a long-standing requirement from some customers to allow larger index key segment size. You can recall that previous releases of InterBase did not allow more than 252 bytes of data to be stored as an index key. With XE, that limitation is now removed, and you can have an index key that is 1/4 the size of the database page. So if you have a 16 kilobyte database page, your index key can go up to 4 kilobytes in size per key. And lastly, with larger record IDs, you can now store many more billions of records in a table. So that's billions with a B. The record identifier has increased from 32 bits of information to 39 bits of information with InterBase XE database, which will accommodate billions of records more with the XE release. So how can you utilize cloud services with InterBase? Well, with InterBase XE, we have tested and certified that you can run your InterBase XE Server Edition product on an Amazon EC2 Windows instance. So many customers have database applications they are developing today and benefit from Amazon EC2 infrastructure for their services on the back end. You can deploy your database application server with InterBase XE Server Edition on Amazon EC2 and have many clients running on the network over the internet with SSL-based encryption between the client and the server. And this provides you the flexibility to scale with Amazon's infrastructure and also to stop and start multiple instances of InterBase on Amazon EC2 as needed. So Amazon EC2 is very popular with developers and testers to make system resources available to them quickly. So you can choose to deploy your InterBase servers on EC2 instances with Windows operating systems so you can enhance your development and testing infrastructure. InterBase and performance. So performance has always been a cornerstone for InterBase for many years. With every release, we continue to improve the performance. With many applications having demanding needs on the InterBase server, we are proud to announce with InterBase XE, we provide faster database sweep capabilities. So that means your InterBase database is kept clean and the garbage collector works much faster to clean up your database. So as you already know, InterBase is a multi-generational architecture using versioning in the database to provide you ACID compliance and the benefit of multiple applications not blocking each other. InterBase XE also has an improved cache management mechanism for your database cache, so it grows when needed and does not consume all of the system resources at startup. So for binary large objects, blobs, and character large objects, clobs, InterBase XE increased the performance when you are using blobs and clob data. So blob data is now stored in a different segment within the database. So accessing blob data or storing blob data does not get impacted by other non-blob information in a table. So this has great performance benefits for different types of queries, such as for aggregate queries that don't really care about blob data. So these types of queries run much faster and improves the performance of the application. So the optimized stream methods for blob and clob also provide simpler, faster, and standard compliant access to blob data types. And with the optimized stream methods, you get increased performance and handling of large objects. So you can stream blob data directly in and out of the database. You can store blobs of any size, greater than 4 gigabytes in the database. A clob, character large object value, can be it could be over 2 billion characters long. And lastly, for direct I/O support on Windows, and this is due to Windows 2008 Release 2 and Windows 7 having introduced some enhancements to the file system caching mechanisms. So this has entitled InterBase to look at alternative mechanisms so customers can have InterBase database access directly using direct I/O. So the file system mechanisms often cache large files and thereby use up the system resources and impede the performance of multiple applications. So direct I/O provides an alternative mechanism where you do not use the Windows file system cache for your database file. So as I mentioned earlier, some of your database files may be hundreds of gigabytes size and range, and you do not want your large file or very large database files to be in the file system cache and thus affect other applications on the system. So with Direct I/O, when enabled on a database file, allows you to directly access the database file to be accessed by the server and not use the file system cache. So this makes InterBase a better first-class citizen on the system by reducing system usage. InterBase and ease of development. So with InterBase, we have addressed ease of development in a couple of ways. Now, one of the ways, not seen on this slide, is how quickly you can get InterBase installed and running. So at this time, before I go over this slide, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Stephen to show us how quickly you can get InterBase installed and running.
Okay, so let's have a look at getting InterBase running here. I've got a Windows 7 machine here with a 32-bit version of the operating system, and I can see I've got quite a bit of disk space free, 20.3 gigabytes. And I've got here also in my machine a developer tools CD that came with RAD Studio, which I recently purchased. So let's browse through here, and we can see there's an InterBase folder which has got the install files for the 32-bit version and the 64-bit version. Alternatively, you can download these, or these files will come on a install CD anyway. So, InterBase really is very much about embedding, deploying, and relaxing. And there's very little that you need to choose when coming through. The main thing is make sure you don't install into a program files folder, because then we have access for reading and writing, which is pretty much the same with most major databases. But I've worked with customers who've installed InterBase and had it running for a number of years before they've had to go back and look at anything to do with it. And InterBase is used in a number of different types of places. It's embedded onto washing machines. It's working out on in tanks. It's working in health clubs. You'll probably come across it every day. And oh, hey, would you look at that? By the time I've finished even just kind of saying hello about InterBase, it's there, it's up and running, and we now have the ability to start hooking into databases and running off. So let's just go and have a look. I'm sure we have some demo data here that's installed. And there we are, we have a database with our data straight away. It's pretty cool, really. A lot quicker than kind of setting up some other databases I've worked with in the past, that's for sure. What do you think, Al?
So what do I think? I think that was just awesome. In less than 3 minutes, I just saw you install, configure, connect, and access InterBase data. Now that's what I'd call ease of development. So the InterBase we just saw Stephen install is included in many of the Embarcadero products and benefits from tight integration from a development perspective and from a database tools perspective that Embarcadero provides. So you can choose to build your application on Windows using Embarcadero's IDEs and then deploy your application on Windows, Mac OS X, or iOS with InterBase. So you can also choose Embarcadero's ER Studio for InterBase design, logical and physical models, and reverse engineer your existing InterBase databases. Use Rapid SQL for faster SQL coding and debugging, and use Embarcadero's Database Change Manager for your InterBase database change management needs to compare schemas and data. So all these database tools have tight integration with InterBase. We'll take a closer look at the 3 Embarcadero database tools for InterBase a little bit later in this webinar. So back to ease of development. With InterBase XE, we now have the ability to access external files greater than 2 gigabytes. So actually, InterBase XE now supports external files greater than 4 gigabytes in size. So that's pretty cool. Also with InterBase XE, we now have the ability to mix coalesce and aggregate functions in the same select statement. So for example, I can now have a coalesce in a aggregate function argument to substitute a value for a null. So that's going to save myself some typing time by using the column number instead. So now with InterBase XE, I can have a SQL statement such like this: select coalesce, price comma 0, sum number sold from sales per article group by 1. So that's also pretty cool. For ease of development, InterBase XE introduces execute statement for a dynamic SQL in stored procedures. So you can build the SQL queries on the fly in the stored procedures and execute them without having to modify or alter your stored procedures metadata. So you can now use dynamic SQL to accomplish tasks such as adding the where clause to a search based on what fields are filled out on a form. So that's also pretty cool. Next, under ease of development, let's take a quick look at the enhancements to the InterBase console, the IB console. So I've just started the IB console, and this is what it looks like. So in InterBase XE, we have enhanced the IB console that you most likely already use for both database administration and for development. So this IB console tightly integrates and leverages all of the InterBase functionality from this single user interface. So this IB console is a graphical interface to InterBase. It provides many administrative functionality such as monitoring capabilities and SQL development for both developers and administrators, and I can also do user administration from within this IB console. Now, in InterBase XE, the IB console provides enhancements for better administration and additional useful documentation for your database metadata. Also, from this InterBase console, I can use it to monitor multiple InterBase server installations on any number of machines from this single user interface. So as a developer or a tester or a DBA, I can use this single tool to keep all of my server deployments in check. The InterBase console in InterBase XE also includes an auto-detecting capability to check on the status of different servers running on my network so it can monitor whether the servers are alive or need some attention. So as we see here on the tree view on my left, I have many different servers that I'm connected to or I have defined inside of my IB console to connect to. So the new enhancement in the IB console in InterBase XE is monitoring these remote servers. So as you can see, the green color on the icon indicates the IB server, either local and or remote, are running and alive. If one of these servers goes down, you get informed by the green circle changing to red. So that's pretty cool. Another enhancement we've added to the IB console is to help you describe some of the database entity descriptions. So if I connect to my employee development database and I look at my tables, I now see I have a new column called descriptions. And descriptions are user-defined descriptions for you as a database developer. When you create your database and model, you can define additional description that will help someone else understand the model better. And I can also add descriptions to most of the other database entities, such as indices, views, stored procedures, triggers, external functions, exceptions, and blob filters. So that's also pretty cool. And one more enhancement I'd like to show you is now from the IB console, I can launch the IB Service Manager right from the IB console. So now I can see the status of my IB server without needing to go to the Start menu and launch the tool separately. So that's also pretty cool. So here's a quick recap on the enhancements we just saw with the new IB console. So we saw we can do auto detecting server status at startup and monitoring of the servers, and that allows us to check on the status of different servers running on our network so we can monitor whether the servers are alive or need some attention. We saw that we can launch the InterBase Server Manager from the IB console. So now by that, we can check the status of the IB server without needing to go out to the Start menu and launch the tool separately. And we also saw how we can add entity descriptions to our database objects, and that gave us better administration and additional useful documentation for our InterBase database metadata. So, whether I'm a developer, a tester, or a database administrator, I can use this single IB console GUI tool to keep all of my server deployments in check. And that's great. Migration from InterBase 2009 to InterBase XE. So here's the steps Embarcadero used internally to migrate our own InterBase 2009 to InterBase XE 64-bit. And your migration should be as easy also. So basically, the migration process to upgrade to InterBase XE is first, copy your preferred IB config file to each instance. Next, backup and restore your admin.ib file, and then backup your old InterBase database and restore it to the new InterBase XE database, giving you an on-disk structure of 15, and then finally, update all of your InterBase clients with the new XE client. So now, in addition to the obvious benefits of full 64-bit memory addressing, better CPU usage, stronger passwords, and the other security improvements, there are some other things we get by upgrading to InterBase XE. So by simply doing this backup and restore of the databases with InterBase XE, the on-disk structure, the ODS version, becomes 15, and with ODS 15, we gain index key sizes can now be 2K rather than the 252 bytes. You'll get faster incremental sweeps due to the InterBase garbage collector, and you'll get much faster blob handling. So if you had queries for a table that contained blobs, but the query didn't request any of the blobs in its result set, the blobs are basically ignored, resulting in much faster queries. And just in case you have an InterBase version older than InterBase 2009, if you take a look at Appendix A, Migrating to InterBase, in the Operations Guide for InterBase XE, it describes how to plan and execute a very smooth migration from earlier versions of InterBase, going all the way back to InterBase 6 to the current InterBase XE. For those of you using legacy versions of RAD Studio, either Delphi or CBuilder, and are looking to migrate to the current RAD Studio XE2, these are the three migration items we see the most. So for Unicode, starting with Delphi 2009 or CBuilder 2009, including the current XE2, RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder now supports Unicode, meaning you may need to make some Unicode conversions to your code based on how you are using strings and chars. It could be as little as no changes are needed. It really all depends on how you are using strings and chars in your application. With Unicode, string types are now based on Unicode, and char now maps to wide char. The Unicode Migration for Mere Mortals white paper on the Embarcadero Migration Update Center website is very useful. The next item is third-party components. So what third-party components and libraries are you using? Now these libraries would need to be rebuilt using XE2 so that they can be used in XE2 projects. Now having the source code makes this a lot easier, and you can also look at our technology partner webpage, tp.embarcadero.com, to see if the vendor already supports XE2. Lastly, XE2 now has a new application framework called FireMonkey. Now, FireMonkey is RAD Studio's next generation business application platform for cross-platform apps. FireMonkey creates these visually stunning HD and 3D business apps that are more immersive and interactive than anything on the market. Now, very soon in this webinar, I'll be showing you some FireMonkey apps using the InterBase XE database, and from the same code base, be able to deploy to both Windows, Mac, and the iOS platforms. So that'll be really cool. I mentioned these three Embarcadero database tools for InterBase XE earlier in this webinar, and this slide shows you some screenshots of what they look like. First, we have RAD Studio, and it's a data modeling tool that helps you discover, document, and reuse your InterBase data assets. It has round-trip database support, so you can easily reverse engineer, analyze, and optimize your existing InterBase databases. Productivity gains and enforcement of organizational standards can be achieved with RAD Studio's strong collaboration capabilities. You'll be able to document and enhance your existing InterBase databases, improve your data consistency, and effectively communicate your InterBase models across your enterprise. You'll be able to trace your InterBase data origins and its whereabouts to enhance your data integration and accuracy. The next tool is Rapid SQL, and this lets you create high-performing SQL code quickly. It'll give you on-the-fly SQL syntax alerts, semantic validation, and SQL parsing. It has full Unicode and enhanced currency support. You're going to get InterBase code completion with dynamic walkthroughs. You'll be able to do reverse engineering, version control, and source code repository for your InterBase databases. The third tool is DB Change Manager, and it helps both the InterBase database administrator and developers. It allows me to simplify, automate, and report on InterBase database changes. I can compare live schema objects. I can compare archive snapshots of schema objects. I can generate the InterBase alter, create, drop DDL scripts for any schema differences. I can do InterBase data comparison, so that'll allow me to assist in comparing, synchronizing, and validating any user data. I can also generate the InterBase DML scripts for my inserts, updates, and delete operations detected during any data comparisons. I can run these audit and compliance reports for database configuration properties, and I can do deep native schema object and data comparison functionality. Plus, many more features are available in each of these three tools. So this was just a quick overview of the Embarcadero database tools for InterBase XE. Now let's talk about RAD Studio XE2 and InterBase XE integration. With the release of RAD Studio XE2, many customers are excited to benefit from the XE2 capabilities from a multi-platform perspective. XE2 has a new application framework called FireMonkey so that you, as developers, can create visually stunning HD and 3D applications on Windows, Mac OS X, and the iOS platforms. With XE2, you can build database applications with InterBase using many database frameworks. In XE2, for your Delphi and CBuilder apps, you can choose to use InterBase Express, often called IBX, or DB Express, the database framework for multiple databases of choice. You can develop your apps with the InterBase Developer Edition that comes with RAD Studio XE2, and deploy your apps with any of the InterBase editions. You can deploy your Delphi XE2 apps to Windows 32-bit and 64-bit, Mac OS X, and the iOS platform for iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch. And with CBuilder XE2, you can deploy your apps to Windows 32-bit and Mac OS X. and there's a couple of points you need to know. First, your client apps can run on Windows, Mac, or iOS with the XE2 build, but you can have your InterBase database server running on any of the 4 InterBase supported platforms. So that's Windows 32 and 64-bit, Mac platform, Linux, and or Solaris. And you do not need to make any changes in your application to target a remote InterBase database server other than the database URL. And when you choose to deploy your Delphi application as a 64-bit application, if you have any dependencies on InterBase user-defined libraries, your user-defined libraries need to be 64-bit also. Likewise, if you choose to deploy on a Mac OS X platform, the user-defined libraries need to be built for your Mac operating system also. We talked about FireMonkey and InterBase XE cross-platform applications for both the Windows and the Mac OS X platform. So to showcase some of the value in RAD Studio XE2 with InterBase, I'd like to show you 2 examples. So the first example will be a Delphi XE2 FireMonkey HD Windows app that we can deploy to both Windows and Mac OS X, accessing InterBase using any one of the database access frameworks. So here we have a Delphi XE2 FireMonkey HD project, and we see a new node called Target Platforms. So for this project, I can create a Windows 32-bit app, a Windows 64-bit app, and I can also create a Mac OS X app. So the Windows app will look like this, and the Mac OS X app will look like this. And we can do this all from the same code base. So let's take a look at that now. I'm in my Delphi XE2 FireMonkey HD project, and from my target platforms, I create a Windows 32-bit app, a Windows 64-bit app, and a Mac OS X app. First, let me run this as a Windows 32-bit app, and let's see what it does. So right now it's going to build it as a Windows 32-bit app and run it. And we see it behaves like as usual. So it's connecting to my backend InterBase XE database, and my help about tells me what it's connecting to. So it's telling me it's running as a Windows application, and it's accessing my InterBase 64-bit database on a Windows platform. So that's great. Now the next thing I want to do is target the Mac OS X target platform and build it and run it again. So in this case, it's going to build it as a Mac OS X standalone executable on my Windows box, but deploy it to my Mac box as we see here. So we first saw it running as a Win32-bit application. Now we see it running on my Mac as a Mac OS X executable. Now if you recall, when we ran it on the Windows box, to get to the About box, we had to go Help About. But on Mac, it's done a little bit differently. So the good news is by creating this executable, the executable changes the menus for the Mac conventions. So on the Mac, I go up to Fishfact, About, and here we see that the client platform is on the Mac, and in this case, it's accessing my InterBase 32-bit database on my Mac OS X platform. So that's also pretty cool. Now let's quickly take a look at the code and see how all of this works. So first I'm going to quit my Mac OS X app. I'm going to go back into my Delphi IDE. I'm going to click on the database component. We see it's a IB database component. So in this case I'm using IBX, InterBase Express. And looking at the database component editor, it shows I'm connecting to my local DB demos database. So in this case, because there's no path, this executable is going to look for the database in the same directory where the executable lives. Now we want to have just one code base for both the Windows and the Mac OS X platform. So let's take a look at the code and see how we did that. Right, so let me click the Code tab, and looking at the code, I see I've added these if-def conditionals for both Windows and Mac. So this way I can have just one code base for both Windows and the Mac OS X platform. So in this case I see an if-def Mac OS. So this is defined for Mac OS X, and this is only needed specifically for the Mac. So what I'm doing here is, if the application is running on the Mac, I know that the pathing works differently regarding the database on Windows versus the Mac. So on Windows, it automatically looks for the database to live in the same directory with the executable. But on the Mac, it works a little bit differently. So it's not really the same. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying determine where the executable is running on the Mac, and then look for the database in that directory. Next, let's quickly look at the code for the About box and see how we implemented that to have a single code base for both the Mac and the Windows platform. So here in the About box code, we want to display what operating system we are running on. And to do this, I'm using this new OS version class that was added new into the RTL, the runtime library, for Windows and Mac cross-platform capability. So this new OS version class, it knows about platform, major and minor builds, and other properties about the operating system platform. So that's also pretty cool. So that was a quick look at a Delphi XE2 FireMonkey HD app that can be deployed to both Windows and the Mac OS X, accessing InterBase using any one of the database access frameworks. Now this was a Delphi application, but the same thing will work for a C++ Builder XE2 application to be both a Windows 32-bit application and a Mac OS X application accessing InterBase. The next app I want to quickly show you is a Delphi XE2 FireMonkey iOS app built for the Apple iOS platform, either an iPhone, an iPad, or an iPod Touch, using a remote DataSnap REST server that connects to an InterBase database on the back end and returns data back to our iOS device. So here I am in my Delphi XE2 FireMonkey iOS application, and the first thing I want to do is start my DataSnap REST server. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with DataSnap, so the main features of DataSnap is for clients to invoke methods implemented on this DataSnap server. So DataSnap will automatically generate the necessary interfaces for the clients to communicate with the server containing the prototypes of the server methods. And DataSnap uses JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, TCP/IP, or HTTP. I can also add filters on both ends between client and server for encryption and compression. And just in case your customers or your clients have a firewall, I'm able to route the data through a tunnel overriding the firewall so my client and my server can communicate. And DataSnap also allows the implementation of client and server in the same application, so you can have in-process connectivity. So that's also cool. Now if we open up a browser, we'll be able to look at the server methods that are on our DataSnap server. So on our server methods, we have a method called getRecords. So we are going to have our iOS client call this getRecords method from our DataSnap server. That's going to connect to our remote InterBase database, access the records, and return it to our iOS device. So let's take a look at that. So let me first close down this browser. We don't need it anymore. So the first thing I can do is test my iOS client on my Windows box to verify that it can connect to my DataSnap server and access my InterBase database and return results back. So I'm going to highlight my client. I'm going to run it. I need to give it the IP address of where my DataSnap server is running on. So on my Windows box, the IP address of my DataSnap server is this, and it's listening on port 8086. So now by pressing this button, it should connect to my DataSnap server, access the InterBase database, and return my results. So that's great. So now that we have it working on my Windows box, the next thing to do is to create a Apple iOS project and run it on my Mac in an iOS, iPhone, or iPad simulator. So we're going to do that next. With Delphi XE2, how we implemented creating the iOS client was to allow you to run a export to Xcode executable, and by doing so it creates an Xcode folder. So I will now take my entire FMX DataSnap IB client directory and copy it or move it over to the Mac, and then I would open up its Xcode project in my Xcode IDE on the Mac, and then I would run my iOS simulator and connect to my DataSnap server, access the InterBase database, and see data returned on my iOS device on my Mac. So we're going to do that next. All right, so now I'll go to my Mac. And on my Mac, I will start my Xcode IDE. I want to open up the Xcode project we just created from Delphi XE2. It loads the project and it builds the project. And now that the project has successfully built, I can run my iOS client using an iPhone simulator. So this will start in iPhone iOS simulator. Bring my default FireMonkey splash screen. I will give it the IP address of my DataSnap server on my Windows box, which is 192.168.74 and 128. I now want to connect to my DataSnap server, access the InterBase database, and return results. So that works great. So what we just saw was a Delphi XE2 FireMonkey iOS app connecting to a remote DataSnap REST server that connected to a remote InterBase database on the back end and returned data back to our iOS device. So that's really cool. The last thing I want to say is the same Delphi XE2 FireMonkey iOS app or any DataSnap client can use cloud services for both the DataSnap server and the InterBase database. So I'm happy to say InterBase and DataSnap are certified to run on cloud services. So here I'm showing an Amazon EC2 instance with InterBase XE Update 3 installed on the Amazon EC2. And I only needed to install it on a T1 micro instance of only 613 megabytes of RAM. So it's great for InterBase and Windows to run with very low system resources on the cloud. And that's a great value proposition of InterBase. And so to summarize, we saw that InterBase XE is a very highly scalable, powerful embedded database. It's very lightweight, but full-featured database management system. It has multi-version architecture. We saw from Stephen, it's very simple to install and get up and running. It has a very low total cost of ownership. It has automatic crash recovery, and it's a self-tuning engine. And this allows developers to create fast and resilient applications. So this ends this webinar. So thank you all for attending. Now we'll open the lines for any questions you might have. Great. So thank you all for attending this. So I have a list of about 15 questions. So let me quickly go through them. And Stephen, anytime you want to jump in, that's fine. So
Sure,
the first question I got was, what's the maximum table size in InterBase XE? So the good news is if you look at the InterBase XE operations guide, Appendix B, it shows all of the InterBase limits. So that's pretty cool. So for your specific question, what's the maximum table size for an InterBase XE database? So it really depends on your database page size. So and also note that the total size for all tables cannot exceed the maximum database size. So So if you have a 1 kilobyte page size, your largest table is 2 terabytes. And if we go all the way down to a 16 kilobyte page size, then your largest table can be 32 terabytes. And likewise, based on maximum database size, the same thing applies. So if you put a limit on your database page size of 1 kilobyte page size, then your largest database is 2 terabytes. And if you go all the way up to 16 kilobytes per page size, then your largest database is also 32 terabytes. So that's a very large table and a very large database. Second question is, when and where is this webinar going to be posted? So yes, soon after this webinar ends, we'll upload this webinar to the EDN site and send you all a link to where it is. How about RAD Studio design tools? Did I see that question somewhere, or was that answered by anyone already?
No, it's still there.
Okay, so when you speak of, let's see what we got here. So when you speak of RAD Studio design tools, maybe I need some more information. Maybe Dave or Steve, you want to jump in on what they might mean by that?
It has to do with database design tools. RAD Studio Delphi C++ Builder Architect Edition includes ER Studio Developer Edition, which allows you to design your database, right?
Okay,
and
so is that
your database as well?
Yeah, if the URL for people to go to is www.embarcadero.com/products/rad-studio/product-editions, and there you'll get a list of the different editions and the tools that are available, and the kind of developer editions of those tools that come with them.
Okay, if that was the intent of the question, then great. That's a great answer. Another question. It was great that Steve's able to get InterBase up and running in 3 minutes or less, and that's great using some of our default table sets. But the good news also is, the InterBase console, I can still create these tables either using, if I already have the tables structure created with a create table SQL script, I can open up the interactive SQL window, drop the table in there and build it that way, or right click into the table area and select create and build a table manually from scratch. So that capability is there.
Another one that was just below that, where you answer, Stephen, I think you answered this one by Bob.
Let's see.
It was about deployment.
Yeah. We're going to contact Bob directly after this to discuss the InterBase VAR and ISV program. So for all of you who are thinking about using InterBase as your embedded database, there's a great InterBase VAR and ISV program, and we'd be more than happy to contact you directly and explain that program to you. Let's see.
There's another one here from Jim asking if I'm building a standalone application, should I use InterBase or Paradox? Well, I definitely kind of look at the InterBase to go and the kind of the desktop version of InterBase. There's some real limitations in terms of table sizes that you can use with Paradox. They're quite low, and also it's pretty old technology now. So definitely have a look at the InterBase desktop licensing for that kind of side of things.
Okay, very good. Another question is ER Studio included with InterBase XE, RAD Studio XE2. As David said, the Architect Edition includes ER Studio Developer Edition. Next question is Rapid SQL included with InterBase XE, RAD Studio XE2. There's an Ultimate Edition of RAD Studio XE2, and the Ultimate Edition is the Enterprise Edition plus the SQL Development Tool, Rapid SQL, the DB Change Manager Tool, and the DB optimizer for SQL profiling and SQL tuning, and that's all included inside a tool called DB Power Studio. Is DB Change Manager included with InterBase XE, RAD, and Studio XE2? So that's the same question. The Ultimate Edition will include DB Change Manager.
And if you want everything, right, Embarcadero All Access.
That is correct. Yes, if you want both ER Studio and the DB Power Studio tools, then All Access license will give you all of that. Question, it would have been nice to show a UDF being created and distributed as both a 32-bit and a 64-bit version. How easy is it to do that? So great question. And following up on these webinars, we're going to do a whole series of InterBase videos and tutorials coming out soon, and that will include that one of those would be that specific test.
I also covered UDFs in the Delphi 24 hours of Delphi, and those replays will get up next week. But you can send me the email, davidi@embarcadero.com, and I can point you to a place where the interim files are. But I did 32 and 64-bit UDF using Delphi with InterBase.
Okay, so now there's a whole new list of questions. Have you folks been looking at this while I've been responding to the others?
I'm just scanning down them very quickly.
And I put up on the screen the edition lists for InterBase as well, so people can see on the screen, hopefully, what's in each desktop to go and server editions. Let's see. All right, Bob's giving you his phone number. All right.
Okay,
cool.
right. Yeah, so InterBase. Go ahead, Stephen.
Go ahead, Al.
Well, InterBase in Cloud should be another one of your videos. Yes, absolutely. We'll have a targeted video just on that. Let's see, which one have I not answered already? Building a standalone app. Should I use InterBase or Paradox? Great question. We've gotten many customers needing to get off of Paradox because Paradox is ending life and will not be supported anymore. So yeah, and InterBase is a great solution, and there's great utilities to convert your Paradox data over into an InterBase database. So that's something you want to look at, and we'll send you links for that. Let's see, great. There's this. Let's see. Powell, great stuff. Is the source code available from somewhere? Yeah. So all the videos you showed are sample applications that ship with RAD Studio XE2. So if you look at the samples and the demos in RAD Studio XE2, all those samples I showed, we include the source code also.
There was a question about how to deploy the embedded InterBase on a client, how to deploy InterBase on a client PC. There's different choices. If you have the to-go edition, that's just a DLL, and you can have the DLL place it where you put DLLs or in the same directory as your executable. Or you can use, there's tools for embedding DLLs inside of executables as well.
Excellent. Another question would be great to show explain the connectivity from an iOS app to DataSnap server is implemented. Yes, it's in the code, but the intent of this webinar was basically an introduction. Later on in this month, I think on February 21 or 22, we're going to do a deeper dive into a lot of these topics, and during that presentation, we can go a little bit deeper. But if you look at the code from that iOS to DataSnap server, you can clearly see how we did the connectivity. Let's see, how easy can database types be switched? For example, when we want to build an app that can access InterBase, but where InterBase should be replaced by for instance, or well, if you're using our DB Express drivers, the great part about that, the same DB Express driver can be used for multiple databases. So that's a huge advantage of using the DB Express drivers. So just by changing the connection string, that should be all you need to change by switching from one database to another. What replication utilities are available? So those of you who recall older legacy InterBase, we did have an IB replicator. So off the record, the roadmap plans calls for reintroducing the InterBase replication utilities. So coming out soon, hopefully InterBase will once again have replication utilities. Oh yeah, so David spoke about how to deploy InterBase embedded on a client PC. Yes, use the to-go edition, which is a simple DLL, which is both the client and server instance of InterBase as a single DLL. Let's see.
There seems to be a question here. I'm not sure if we covered this one. Can encryption be added after the database has been in use? Yeah, no, absolutely. You can go ahead and run a script against the database to say, right, go encrypt this column or encrypt the entire database. Obviously, just be aware that if you are going to do that, then you need to make sure that your connection stuff's going to be okay for running that as well. So.
Okay, the question on limits on InterBase database size. So we covered that. Take a look at InterBase XE Operations Guide, Appendix B, InterBase limits clearly lists the limits on database sizes. One question by Patrick. Would you clarify why InterBase is installed outside of program files? Stephen, you want to take that? Specifically more for permission reasons, but I'll let you expand on that, Stephen.
Yeah, it's mainly to do with if it's Windows 7 and Vista introduced new security around what goes in and out of program files, and having InterBase installed outside the program files folder means that it's not within kind of restricted space, and as we're reading and writing to files in there a lot, then it just helps let Windows know that you're doing something you expect to do, rather than having it think that your database engine is doing something naughty. So that's the kind of main thing there.
Okay, I think we covered this. What are the different editions? So we see on the page there, you can clearly see the different editions of InterBase and what their features and functions are, and when should you use one and not the other. Can you deploy the developer edition to your customers? So the purpose of the concept behind the developer edition that's included in RAD Studio XE2 was designed to be a developer-only version. So it's got some limits that where you cannot, well, it's a full-featured product, but it's got limits that will not allow you to deploy it out to your customers. So there's some built-in timer limits on it that it's going to turn itself off, because it does not want to be deployed as a production database. But for testing purposes and for development purposes, it works just fine.
So it might be worth just pulling up the URL if you want to download any of the trial or developer editions. If you go to cc.embarcadero.com/free/interbase, then you'll be able to get access to the downloadable versions.
Compare InterBase versus Firebird. Yes, there's some good comparison documentation we have. Follow up to this webinar email link. We could send you those links so you can see the difference between Firebird and InterBase XE. Yes, encryption. So can encryption be added after the database has been in use? Yes. You can either do that through SQL, or you can do that through the IB console. So both options are available to you to add encryption to the database after it has been in use. Okay, have I missed any?
Yeah, just the last one that's just come through here. Can InterBase be embedded in an app without the DLL linked at compile time? Well, you can obviously, if you've got the client installed on the machine, then you don't need to distribute any of the InterBase DLLs along with it. But yeah, I think the only way you can do that at the moment is to actually have the DLL that you pass along with InterBase, unless you've got a post-build function that will wrap it into the DLL. But I haven't actually tried that myself.
And there was a question here, maybe you answered it. Somebody asked about, is InterBase suitable for multi-user applications? Absolutely, that's what it's all about. And on the product edition pages, it mentions volume packaging, but you can contact sales to get any number of deployments and users on the server side, including unlimited users on a server. And InterBase uses a multi-generational architecture so that lots of people can be accessing the data, and then it will keep track of all the updates that people are doing.
Okay.
There was a question here about, can you install InterBase on Mac iOS, or do you have to use the embedded one? We don't have InterBase yet for Mac iOS. It's something that the team is exploring.
So InterBase, InterBase client server is on the Mac, but I don't think we have a. Was that the question?
No, this one was about iOS, but we do. Well, it's
Okay.
actually Mac/iOS. We do have Mac 32-bit server.
Correct. That's correct.
So for Mac OS X, we have server. Sorry, I'm talking while I'm typing. That's bad. You guys keep talking. I'll type.
Okay. So as far as roadmap plans, we do have plans to create a InterBase iOS version. So that's very exciting.
Yep. Let's see. Can I expose data in a desktop or to-go vision versus HTTP? Well, you'd have to do HTTP, Bob. You could do all of that through things like build a REST server, a data snap server, and have it talk to InterBase. And one of the things that you can, if you generate a data snap server, you can generate a JavaScript client that makes REST calls. So check out all the replays in CodeRage 6 and videos in the 31 videos in December for how you can use data snap and REST to talk to InterBase database on the back end.
Yeah, there's also a question just come through about, can sweep and garbage collection be set to run on a live database environment? Well, in previous versions of InterBase, your garbage kind of collection happened when you kind of backed up and restored the database. You'd find that, you know, quite regularly you get a slightly smaller database because the dead records were got rid of. Well, with XE2, with InterBase XE, it's actually got some automatic garbage collection in there. That means it's constantly looking and going, well, this space is now kind of gone, and reutilizing it. So there's some really kind of clever stuff in there to automatically garbage collection. So that does happen automatically now on the live database environment.
Okay, very good. For a user to trial our application, they can download the InterBase trial, and we can deploy the application. So if you take the trial that you download, the developer edition, and you embed it into your application and you give it to users to try, the developer edition has some internally built timeout parameters to try to prevent it from being deployed into a production environment. And so for limited testing, it's going to work that way. If you truly want to test it in that environment, come speak to us. We'll explain the VAR and the ISV program. Maybe we can give you some trial copies of a full production version of InterBase that you can use to test with your customer base, just to verify it works correctly. Here's a question on, will we get more advanced grids for FireMonkey? Maybe Dave, I might defer that one to you.
Well, it's an InterBase talk, but we're looking to add all sorts of stuff to FireMonkey, both in the updates that we're doing, mostly monthly updates, as well as future generations. So we have a huge roadmap of things to do, but we're also looking to our third-party partners like DevExpress to look at moving their grids forward for FireMonkey as well. And again, download stuff, and that event isn't on the calendar page, but I think it's. I wish I remembered. It's either the 23rd or 24th of February is the next InterBase webinar that you guys are doing, right?
Correct. 21st, I believe.
21st. Okay. So stay tuned to the events page. It's just not. It's not up there yet. It's funny. January 32. That's really funny. This one. I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
It's a special day.
Yeah, golly. And then there's February 29th this year. So this is 367 days of 2000. Mayan calendar bug, I think.
It's the day that time forgot.
Yeah.
Oh, great question. Does this webinar signal an increased commitment to InterBase? Yes, absolutely. So those of you who follow the Borland, CodeGear, Embarcadero story, so the good news is Embarcadero is truly dedicated and committed to enhancing both InterBase and the RAD Studio product line. So you're going to see additional commitment and additional resources and additional marketing applied to InterBase to make it both great and the RAD Studio equally as great, or even greater than it already is.
Yeah, I think you already talked about the encryption, right? We ship. I guess we ship. You have your choice of DES, which I guess has been broken, but we have AES support as well. Yeah.
All right, question. If I deploy a program with embedded database, does my client need an InterBase license? So part of a, if you sign up for that VAR or ISV agreement, we will give you an embedded license that you include with the product. So from your customer's client perspective, there's no license they need to install. As far as they're concerned, the application just runs and the database works correctly without them even knowing what's happening on the back end.
And Jim again was asking about can InterBase be embedded in an app without the DLL? We don't do that directly, but there's tools that allow you to link a DLL into an executable and deploy it. But we'll figure out what is the pricing of the to-go edition. Contact our sales offices. Let's go back. I'm not sure where the buy now upgrade. The buy now.
Is it like shop.embarcadero.com? Do we list it that way?
That would be too simple, wouldn't it? And again, we have shops, so there's the different ways. Let's go down here. I'll just pick the USA, so it's in dollars versus pounds or euros. And then go to InterBase. And so there's some sample pricing, desktop, and the different packs. To go, there's the to go.
But for the record, this is probably individual user pricing. If you sign up for the ISV and VAR agreements, these prices don't apply to you. It really comes down to what's your application, what's your total cost for that application, and then we determine what percentage of that cost should be based on the InterBase database, and that's the agreement we come up with.
What are database design options for Delphi professional developers? Is that Delphi Professional the edition or professional developers? And again, database design. I thought we already covered.
Well, Delphi Professional comes with the DB Express and the IB Express components to connect through to Delphi. Sorry, to InterBase.
But for database design, you can.
In terms of the design tools, then you need Architect or Ultimate for those additional tools.
Right, if you want to do an ER Studio type design. If you want to just do database development, IB Console has a tools item that lets you do your create tables and your alter tables and all of those things, creating blobs and so on. But yeah, if you want to do database design, ER Studio is available.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff in IB Console.
Okay. What about InterBase XE 64-bit manager? There is a 64-bit version InterBase manager. If you install the 64-bit version of InterBase, you get the 64-bit manager. Well, you get the server manager that deals with 64-bit. Okay. Does InterBase have any relationship with All Access? Well, InterBase is included with All Access. So if you go to the All Access license, go back over here and go to, let's see, I go All Access. All Access just includes everything that we have, all the database tools, all the developer tools. It includes everything, including InterBase. So it's got everything, all the database tools, developer tools, design tool. So the All Access license has it all. And it includes InterBase as well for development.
So adding InterBase to my Delphi desktop program, will that add 40 megabytes to the size of the download? So the answer is no. InterBase is not going to add to the size of your executable, but it's going to add, to the initial install. But it's but it becomes compressed for the installation. So hopefully that answers the question.
And
Next
it's a
question is,
small install, right? It's very small install as you
that's
saw.
correct. A tiny, yes. As you saw Stephen do the quick installation, a very small download and a very small installation, a very small footprint. So that's great. So next question is most interesting. It takes me back to my VisiBroker middleware Corba days. So the question was, do you have middleware products just like Tuxedo? So I believe the question you're asking here is if you're asking for middleware for transaction processing with InterBase. So if that's the type of question, first I'm going to probably have to contact you directly to get a use case for what you're really trying to do. But as a general response, InterBase does provide transaction isolation level. So we have snapshot, also called concurrency. We have read commit, and we also have consistency, which is also called table stability. So I'm still going to need some additional information on what you need to do with such a middleware product and InterBase. So I'm going to make some assumptions. So if you're using Tuxedo for distributed transaction management, I'm going to make this assumption that maybe you're using Oracle for the back end, since what I remember now is Tuxedo is now an Oracle product. But the good news is, depending what you're doing with InterBase might not even need a distributed transaction manager like Tuxedo, which is probably a good thing to do because InterBase may not even require one either. So the best thing I need to do is maybe contact you after this webinar, so for you to give me a use case of what you're trying to do. So I'll need to know if you have like certain requirements for transaction stability. What are your application and middle tier technologies that you're currently using? So those types of questions I'm probably going to also ask. Are you doing anything like JCA connectors with Tuxedo to access your data sources? And if so, what's your current backend database vendor? So once we get answers to those questions, we're going to do whatever we can to figure out how you can get to use InterBase to do what you need to do. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see what else we have on here. InterBase SMP is part of our All Access Silver. Can it be upgraded separately? Yeah, I'm more on the technical side, so on the sales side.
Yeah, like I just said, go to your registered user downloads and grab it. And if there's links off EDN or off your All Access portal, if you have any issue, just contact the All Access. You have an All Access contact, either in support or service, and they will help you as well. Absolutely. If you're keeping your All Access Silver up to date, renewing each year, you have access to all the latest versions of all of our products.
You are correct. I just looked that up myself, and it says if you as a customer is currently on All Access Support and maintenance, then yes, you are eligible for the current InterBase XE release as part of your maintenance. Yep. But if you're not current on support and maintenance, then we can contact your sales representative, and we can discuss the options for what you need to do to get XE.
Yep.
All right, good deal.
And a few more questions showed up as well.
Okay. So is it okay to develop on a 32-bit machine and deploy on a 64-bit machine? Which InterBase developer version do I need? So the good news is yes, we have both 32-bit and 64-bit versions of InterBase. So all of the depends what you need to do. So right, there are, as Dave has shown up here, there are 3 separate versions of InterBase. Desktop edition, to-go edition, and server edition. So depending on your needs and what you need to do, you'll need to pick one of those 3 versions of InterBase. But yes, there's 32-bit and 64-bit versions. So 64-bit is currently Windows right now.
And the databases work. You have 32 and 64-bit Windows. So if you create your database as a starting point on 32-bit, just install 64-bit InterBase and access the same database. If you have DLLs, as Al mentioned in the presentation, you'll need a 32-bit version of a user-defined function in a DLL. For your development, you'll need to have a 32-bit version of that user-defined function, and then build a 64-bit UDF, DLL, if you want to deploy a user-defined function to a 64-bit. But again, with Delphi, for example, you just recompile 64-bit, and it just works. And I did that in 24 hours of Delphi. So absolutely, you can choose to develop on 32-bit and deploy to even not only 64-bit, but to other platforms as well.
Okay. For this next question, David, I'm going to defer to you to answer the first part, and I'll take the second part. I noticed that documentation help files for Delphi XE2 is very sparse. But from what I see, we have the doc wiki up there. If you have not gone up to the doc wiki.embarcadero.com, RAD Studio documentation, it has progressed greatly. As you recall, since we released it, there's been 3 major updates, and a 4th one is coming out. And with each of those updates, there's probably like 1,000 pages of new documentation with each release. So if you have not seen the doc wiki.embarcadero.com on the RAD Studio documentation, I think you'll be very impressed on how well they have now documented RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder.
Yeah, they're updating it every day, and then the help updates that come out for RAD Studio, Delphi, C++ are simply extracted from the wiki repository. So it's being updated all the time. And the InterBase database documentation is very, very, very complete. I mean, it has every function defined, every SQL statement defined, all the tools are defined, everything is in the documentation for InterBase. It's probably the most documented that I know of.
Yes, I'm going to second that. So if as part of your InterBase installation, there's a docs folder that has, I think 1, 2, 3, is about six separate InterBase documentations: the API guide, the data definition guide, the developer's guide, the embedded SQL guide, language reference guide, an operations guide, and release notes. So as David mentioned, yes, it's probably by far the most comprehensive set of documentation I've seen for a database anywhere. So that's great for InterBase. So good for those guys. Next question, does InterBase have any debug tools for SQL code like Sybase? I mean, step-by-step execution, set breakpoints, watch variable values. So we spoke about the Rapid SQL tool for InterBase. In that tool, I can do that incremental step execution of both my SQL code and my stored procedures.
But not for InterBase yet.
Yeah, I see.
It's for SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, and Sybase.
Okay.
But it's on the roadmap to add more APIs to InterBase so that all those can be done, including profiling and other kinds of things.
Okay, correct. Yes, I do see it on the roadmap.
Yep.
How is InterBase deployed on PCs and Mac? So the good news is there's a separate Mac installer for InterBase. So the same way you saw Steven install it on Windows, it's the same type of installation on a Mac. Mac does installations a little bit differently. You'll get a Mac package. You'll double-click on that package. It will install InterBase on the Mac, same way as it installed InterBase on the Windows platform.
Yeah, David, have you still got the downloads page up there? We can just show people where we can go get the downloads.
Yep, there it is. Sorry.
Yes, you'll see there's a separate Mac download, Solaris, Linux, and Windows.
Right, and Japanese as well, somewhere in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next question. Can InterBase be a viable solution for a desktop app that simply needs its own database? Yes, absolutely. Many of those, in the beginning of the webinar, we had those InterBase as part of your life, whether you know it or not. Many embedded solutions out there that have InterBase embedded using its own database, and the beauty of it is, as Stephen mentioned, once the whole concept of install it, embed it, deploy it, and relax, and it just works. Little or no database administration required, self-tuning, so it works perfectly for desktop apps that simply need its own database.
And rather than just being some kind of maybe subset of SQL, it's full SQL. Everything you can do with the server edition of InterBase, with encryption, everything you can do in the desktop version and the to-go version as well. So you have everything that's in the product, in the server product, is in the desktop and the to-go.
Okay, just a clarification on that 64-bit or 32-bit InterBase version. So the question is, do I need a 64-bit or a 32-bit InterBase developer version? So it really depends on the platform. So both 32-bit and 64-bit will run on a 64-bit operating system. If you want to truly exploit the 64-bit operating system and have access to all of the memory and all of those great features that you get with a 64-bit operating system, then yes, by all means, use a 64-bit version of InterBase on a 64-bit operating system.
And if you want to develop and test against both, there is a 64-bit developer edition and 32-bit developer edition. I think when you purchase RAD Studio or Delphi C++ Builder, I think we give you the 32-bit version on the install. But in any case, you go to the downloads page and get the developer edition you need for developing. There's the 32-bit for Mac OS, 32-bit Linux developer, 64-bit Windows. So we have all the 32-bit and 64-bit developer versions for you to do your development and testing before you.
Yeah, the actual if you order the media kit with RAD Studio, then the folder which we browsed to earlier has the installer for both the 32 and the 64-bit. Right.
As you showed, that's what you showed when you installed, right? You showed two install executables.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but you can always grab them, even if, yeah. You can just grab them from the downloads page. Let's see. So I can develop on 32-bit machine with InterBase 64-bit. So Daryl, no, you need, if you have a 32-bit machine, you'll need to develop and test against 32-bit InterBase. If you have a 64-bit operating system, you can develop and test on either 32-bit or 64-bit. So that's the subtle difference. Yeah, the 64-bit InterBase needs a 64-bit operating system and a 64-bit processor.
But what you could do is, if you have a 64-bit machine on your network, you could put your database against there and then run your 32-bit client install of InterBase and connect across the network to the InterBase server.
David was asking, he said right now they're embedding SQLite in their executable, and he wanted to know if we have a mechanism for taking InterBase and embedding it inside of your executable, your application. And I posted two comment and or answers to his question about what he was looking for. One, of course, you talked about our InterBase To Go edition, and I have the I think it's on the screen now. I have the different editions from the InterBase product editions page up on the screen. That's up there right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the InterBase To Go edition is a InterBase and a DLL, full InterBase server and a DLL. It can run in process or out of process. And there is a way, and Andriano, who is one of our employees in developer relations and evangelist for the world, he has some notes about how you can do that on Windows, how you can take a DLL and embed it as a Windows resource in your Windows executable, and then it just looks like it's still a DLL architecture, but again, it's one deploy of an executable. So David, I said, send me an email and I'll connect you up with Andriano, who will get you the notes. And then as far as what the cost can be, Al, maybe you want to talk a little about pricing for these different editions and ISV OEM things.
Correct. So yes. So yes, if you're planning to be one of these ISVs or VARs, the best thing to do is we can contact you directly. It pretty much comes down to a discussion of what type of app are you building, what do you think your cost for that complete app is going to be. Then based on that, we come up with what the the cost for the database should be. So every case is kind of different. So it's best for us to have a conversation after this webinar, and we can get you set up with one of the ISV and or VAR agreements and move forward that way.
And that's for To Go and or server edition. I know we have OEMs. You mentioned some of them, like 911 call processing, for example. I think another one is InterBase is buried inside of some of these baggage screening systems that you see in the airports, those big tube things that you hand your bags off. InterBase is running inside of those big monster devices as well.
That's correct. And even in smaller devices, like when Stephen did the installation, he mentioned washing machines, those Electrolux washing machines. InterBase is embedded in there. Some of these cable boxes. So if you're watching cable TV, most likely you have an embedded InterBase database in your cable boxes. At least here in the Americas, our emergency phone systems, the 911 emergency phone systems, InterBase is embedded in those devices. So it's a very popular, lightweight embedded database, and the advantage to it is, as we say, embedded in there, no DBA required, and it'll just run for years and self-tune itself. So it's a very powerful embedded database.
And also on pricing, if you just need like one license because you're going to deploy a desktop application, for example, for a doctor or a small business or a few deployments, then you go to our shop site. There's the per desktop, per deployment, per simultaneous users pricing is on the shop site. But again, as Al is saying, if you're doing more than just a few, or if you want to really join the ISV VAR OEM world, then contact the sales offices in the different countries you're in directly. And if you're not sure, just send us emails. Al is al.manarino, MANNARINO. I think I can do that by going back here and putting that one up real quick. There's your
Great.
email address. And if you're in the UK or in Europe, it'd be sort of middle of the night for you, then Stephen.ball at Embarcadero.com. And I'm just David I at Embarcadero.com. Then it turned out right when, Al, when you were demoing the multi-tier from mobile, there was a question about how could you build an application for Android, or in your case you were doing iOS that can connect to InterBase, and I mentioned that there's a few ways that we're looking at next generation compilers and future ideas for InterBase embedded inside of devices. Like tablets and phones and things of that kind, so you could build applications that would use that InterBase instead of SQLite. The team's looking at that. We don't have any product announcements yet. And also our Delphi and C++ compilers, we're working on next generation compilers to be able to target ARM chip processors. So there's things in the works, but in the meantime, we've got the mobile connectors, which you demoed and have demoed elsewhere. That allows you to use our DataSnap technology as a middle tier to get from these smartphones and tablets and devices to a Windows DataSnap server that would then talk to InterBase running somewhere.
So that's correct. So as David said, as we saw today, so out of the box, we know how to target Win32 and 64-bit, Mac OS X, and the iOS platform. And as David mentioned on our roadmap, we're also planning to add Android as a supported target platform. But also, in addition to that DataSnap server I saw you, when you create a new DataSnap server, we'll also see an option for mobile connectors. So by adding mobile connectors to it, we now generate all the helper classes. So if you're writing your own Android client or BlackBerry client or iOS client or Windows Phone 7 client, we'll now give you all these helper files that you will add to your application, and those helper files through your device will connect to that DataSnap server, access those same methods we saw in my sample code, and bring back those result sets to the client, the same way we saw in the sample iOS app I just ran.
And earlier today, people asked, what about database tools? And you talked about the database tools, and there's several ways to get those. One is we have DB Power Studio, which gets you Rapid SQL, Change Manager, DB Change Manager, DB Optimizer. We also have our ER Studio for data modeling and reverse engineering the data model of the database, including InterBase. In RAD Studio or Delphi XE Ultimate or C++ Builder, we have our Ultimate Edition, which includes the database tools and the programming tools. The Architect Edition has ER Studio and the developer tools. And then if you want everything, all the database tools, the modeling tools, the development tools, and InterBase itself for development, then we have our All Access Edition. And those you can find those on the RAD Studio product editions, and each of the products, Delphi and C++, have a product editions page with these same layouts as well. So you can check out those editions of Delphi C++ and RAD Studio. Ultimate Architect and All Access gets it all to you.
So the intent for this webinar was pretty much an introduction to InterBase and an introduction to the integration between InterBase and our RAD Studio tools. In a couple of weeks, February 21, we're going to do a much more deeper InterBase on Windows and Mac presentation, and that's going to focus more on the Windows and Mac and specifically on much more live code examples of Delphi and InterBase combining cross-platform, much more deeper dives on using DB Express and using InterBase Express. We're also going to try to give some UDF working on both sides just to show how that works on both platforms. So that's going to be a much more deeper session on what we saw today. So if you're interested in that, look for the webinar invitation, and yes, by all means, sign up for that.
And it'll also appear on the events page off the Embarcadero homepage any day now. And again, February 21st, 3 times, 6 a.m., 11 a.m., and 5 p.m., all those Pacific time are your equivalent time. So much more technology and programming with InterBase on February 21st. Okay, Al, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for being here all the way through from this morning. And again, thank everyone for being a part of this webinar series. We'll see you again real soon. I think next up in our developer world is Fast Reports on February 7th. Then I'm doing a FireMonkey 3D on the 9th, and if you're using Delphi, the 17th birthday of Delphi is February 14th. We'll have 3 webinars, 6 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., focusing on FireMonkey and 3D programming and all sorts of math and science and engineering examples. And so stay tuned to all of those on our events page. And again, thank you, Al, and thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.